So I think we're on live stream again. So are we live streaming again?
We are.
Yeah, thank you. So now we are going to move on to item 8, our reports. 8.1 is our environment strategy, direction of travel, and that's going to be presented to us by Gina with the support of Chris. Thank you. And Simon.
Kia ora. I guess I'm just going to do a slight scene setting. At the Strategy Operations and Finance meeting, we had a little bit of an overview about the journey that we have been on to date with our strategies. The environment strategy is one of those that we've been progressing with you since around the middle of 2023. So this is not the first time that we have looked at the elements or components of the environment strategy. You have had the opportunity to be part of briefings in 2023 where you provided some input, and now really we've condensed that input and we're bringing it back to you today. And that the team is going to talk to you a bit more about the detail in the paper. But I just did want to give you a bit of a heads up that one of the things that we're doing as part of our new year sort of settling back into our program of work is looking at some of the upcoming engagements with the community. So, for example, for the climate change and resilience strategy, you're aware that there's Te Katoa Kapiti underway and a report back is due shortly. We just want to make sure that we've calibrated our timing for engagement on topics around climate that support that conversation, and it will be the same for the environment strategy. We want to make sure that, for example, we have the Kapiti Whai tour work underway, that while we are busy starting to bring this to the surface, that there's the right alignment between the conversation with the community. So Gina will touch on a bit on that today, but we are going to come back to you just to confirm how the timing of those things fit together. So I wanted to lead off with that because I think it's really important that we're having the right conversation with our community as we talk about some of these topics, which I know that there is high interest in. So I will pass on to the team.
Thank you. So you got in front of you what is a little bit of a redo of the paper that was left lying on the table at the end of last year. So it's substantively the same with some adjustments to some dates. As Chris has mentioned, coming into this year, we're really thoughtful about how some of the pieces align. So we will come back to you with a bit of an update on that. In recommendation B, you'll note that there is a date there for public consultation in late March 2024. We might come back with a bit of a change to that. So we'll just flag that we might make a change to that recommendation as part of the process, but we'll come back to that. We'll take the paper as read, but as Chris says, there's an attachment there, this PowerPoint presentation here that summarises really the output of some of the conversations that we've already had over the last year, including with this group and with in an interactive briefing on the 24th of October with the wider council group. As you'll see, we talk about some of the key pressures in there, including patterns of development, land use, resource consumption, and the pressures put on the district through growth, and some of the main issues that we're facing, such as habitat loss, invasive species. So really great to hear the conversation just now with Andy on the pest management area, and increase in impervious surfaces and runoff, flooding as a consequence of that, excessive nutrients in our waterways and the environmental contamination from a range of sources. As you'll see in there, I think it's page, page 18 of your agenda. Talks a little bit about what council's role is across a number of areas, including planning and policy, public land management, asset management, service delivery, facilitation and collaboration, education and capacity building, funding support, project delivery, regulation and compliance, innovation, advocacy, and natural disaster response and recovery. A really key point to make is, as you've heard from Andy this morning, in a lot of these spaces, we are not the only holder of the levers. We have some partners that we need to work really closely with. As part of the focus of what we want to do in this strategy, in the back page 23, you can see some of the activities that we're proposing would be part of the strategy. Really key point to note, the black box in the bottom there on priority activities, which talks about us looking at the breadth of things that we are doing and what we need to focus on, where are the gaps. So that would be a really key first part of the process that we're proposing, out of which things like a proposal for an integrated pest management plan or strategy or something of that nature would fall out. So where are the key focus areas that we think are important, and what are the things that we would need to do to work together with our partners that hold some of those levers. I think that's probably the key points that I want to make. Yes, and the other point that we will make is that I think at the previous meeting of the Climate Environment Subcommittee, recommendation was made that we talk to our mana whenua partners. We went to Te Whakamenenga o Kapiti on the 31st of October to seek their advice on how they would like to be involved. We have had a member, Hura Waipaki, has been included in our Climate Change and Resilience Community Think Tank, and we are working with our mana whenua partners going forward on how else they would like to be involved as these strategies progress. So that's a continued piece of effort that we'll work together on.
Sorry, I just add to that and say part of the reason I've made my comments about some of the other processes underway, such as Te Kutai Kapiti and the Kapiti Whai Tour, is that our mana whenua partners are heavily engaged and involved in some of those processes. And there is really great work that's been underway around cultural values, assessments, and input around priorities from a mana whenua perspective that we would be looking to leverage and bring into this process once it's got to a point of being finalised through that process. So we're trying to make the most of engagement that's already underway rather than try and introduce new engagement, because our mana whenua partners have said to us that they are prioritising their resource and capacity through the process. So we've been respectful of that feedback. What it means though is that we don't have the perfect timing between some of these things, and so we're trying to think about how do we pause in some places so that we can realign, and how do we leverage off things that are underway. So I do just want to point that out because we do recognise the significance of our mana whenua partners' kaitiaki role in the environment space, and that leads into climate change as well.
Thanks, Chris. So I'll move to the recommendations that we've got here. We're asking that the subcommittee note the content of the presentation attached and summary of feedback from previous work, provide feedback on any additional considerations for inclusion in that document, and we will come back to you on the timeframes involved there. And particularly provide any feedback on what we've got regarding Council's role in the environment ecosystem and any gaps in the known challenges and levers for change framework that we're using. Any gaps in the proposed target areas, pathways and activities to accommodate important environmental issues. Any important environmental issues we've missed or gaps in proposed focus. Note, as I said, the conversation that we have had with Te Whakamenenga and the work that we want to do going forward with our mana whenua partners. And note that we have been engaging with key stakeholders such as our council advisory groups, but that wider consultation would occur as part of the engagement processes. Happy to take questions.
Thank you, Gina and Chris. So before we go to questions, I'll just say that Hurawai is actually online, yes, and our Mayor is also online now. So the first light is Councillor Coe. Thank you.
Thank you. It's good to see some further progress on this strategy. Look, I'm going to just make a similar point to what I made in relation to the climate strategy, and that is I would like to see this direction of travel document be really punchy, and you know, I used the word de-waffleise the other day with the climate, which is a bit harsh. I'm sorry about that, but you know, I don't think we want something that's a bit airy-fairy, motherhood and apple pie when it comes to the environment. We need to be really punchy and clear and send a clear message to our community about what we're going to do. So for me, the key messages are this is a really important area for us. Environment is a key reason why people chose to live here and why people visit here. So it's critically important, but it's a huge area, and we don't have the resources to fix everything. So, and I think we need to make that point. We also need to make the point that we have to work in partnership with other organisations such as Greater Wellington and DOC. So it's not just us alone. So part of our role is really to facilitate the interactions with those other organisations. We also need to engage the community because it's that leverage of resources that we can't solve this on our own. We need to leverage with the community. We want the community to help us achieve these goals. The next key message would be that we actually don't know the state of our environment here. And as a matter of priority, before we can set any goals, we need to understand what the current state of play is. So we're unable really to set priorities and goals until we know what that state is, because you don't know where to direct our resources first, because we're obviously not going to be able to do everything. So I think those are some really key points. And then the other thing is to spell out what are the tools that we have available to us. The district plan is a tool, education is a tool, and we've got other, policies and strategies that we can use so that at least we know we're not going backwards in any of these things. So while we might not understand where the priorities are at the moment, we need to make sure that at least we're holding our own in terms of the key measures and not going backwards. So to me, that sort of is a reasonable kind of framework to work to, and I'd like to see that encapsulated in the upfront piece that goes out in that direction of travel. We can be a little bit waffly about the strategies and how we actually do stuff, but to me that's the kind of like the key message that we need at the front there.
Great.
And we definitely need something in there about the pest eradication strategy. To me that's a big one, and it's an opportunity to engage with the community. I would love to see the predator-free stuff come forward in this document, because I think that's something that where there's a high level of emotion around that in the community, and we can tap into that and be seen to be doing something and supporting our community and achieving things that are important to them. So that's my feedback, if you like. Thank you.
Great feedback.
Do you have any comments, Gina? Thank you.
No, thanks. I think that's great. Noted that, and we can definitely look at incorporating that into the directional travel and final strategy document as well.
Thank you. So before we move on to other questions, so in relation, I have to admit, on page 16, the scope, that box there, it's actually very difficult to read. So I'm just wondering, what area would any pest strategy fit into?
I think one of the focus areas is around ecological restoration. So
Yes.
that's
Okay.
as has been mentioned this morning, invasive species is a critical.
So, okay, excellent, thank you. Right, so now we'll move online to Mr. Black. Hi, Simon.
Hi, thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you very much for that presentation, team. One of my observations actually follow on from Councillor Coe's as well. I don't think we have a current baseline. Also, we're pretending that everything's going to be BAU. Do we have any visioning of what our future might look like in certain areas? Because that's going to form different strategies. If everything's okay, let's continue the path we're going on, or if things are going to drastically change, climate's going to change, what are things that we're mitigating? What are the impacts? What are the likelihoods? So it's kind of like a bit of a, what are we trying to achieve predicated on some assumptions, which I don't think are quite overt enough.
Okay.
I think that's great feedback, Simon, and I think leaning back into Councillor Coe's comments around the sort of state of the environment, so to speak, I think one of the first things that we're aiming to do is to be able to present that back, obviously this forum, but more broadly, so that we can unpack some of the priorities within there. And for now, I think it would be hard for us to go, we're really going to aim to do this. We can tell you what we're doing now. And I think the point of being able to get that state of the environment is to work with you to determine what the next priorities would be and where we do need to lean in more versus asking someone else to. So I think that's in there. But if we can ensure that we've highlighted that more strongly in the direction of travel, we certainly do that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Black. So now we'll move on to Councillor Coford. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, Madam Chair, Gina, just with reference to climate change environment strategies, I don't see much evidence of it being factored into the long-term plan. Is there going to be more activity with that?
Thank you. So we have factored in just a small amount of funding for our strategies to ensure that we can get to next steps. For the strategies themselves, there is activity underway. So even this morning, listening to our work around pest control, we do have work underway. And it's the same for our climate change space. And in fact, the team's going to be talking to you about grants allocations for climate action shortly. So the work that's underway is continuing. And in some places, we are going to be doing more. I guess the benefit of these strategies is they're taking a slightly longer term focus so that we can start to talk about where our priorities now and the future will be. And that's what we're trying to get our, I guess our finger on the pulse of, particularly around the environment space. The reason I mentioned the Kapiti Whaitua is there's a huge amount of work underway around our waterways and the priorities in there. And I think some of our partners' aspirations, I'll call them for now, or recommendations, would require a huge investment from council into the future. So we don't have that on the table yet, but it will be coming for conversation soon. And so I think it's making sure that we've got the right timing for some of these conversations, and you can see that full picture before we try and prioritise where we might be leaning into first. Because quite frankly, there is a lot of work to be done, and we're going to have to work at the pace of that and the priority of it in terms of its impact on the environment.
Oh, thanks for that. So you're just identifying the priorities and then you'll allow for perhaps more participation with the long-term plan shortly or later on? Absolutely,
and I would say that obviously we're putting our best foot forward in terms of what we know now. It could be that in fact, as part of next steps from Vision Kapiti and some of the scenario planning that we do with you, we'll be looking at the different investment pathways you could pursue. I think it's really important though that not all the money needs to come from council, and that's really important. I think it's who we're partnering with, and making sure we have those relationships, and that there's a chance for us to work out what's the priority and how we're working together, be it that we have voluntary support or central government or philanthropic or wherever it's coming from, all targeted towards the same goal. So we're not necessarily proposing that it's council that needs to put the money on the table. It could be others, and that would be part of the conversation with you.
Just a comment, speaking of which, with pest control, reference was made to Toroto Road in Oldtaki. DOC have quite a busy program down Rahui Road. They're constantly setting traps and attending to the possums, and our cats are attending to the rabbits, and evidence of that around the house. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So thank you. There's no further questions. I've actually got a couple of comments and questions. So as was mentioned by Councillor Coe, we haven't, well, I don't think we have a very good understanding of the state of our environment. I think through the Whaitua process of which I'm on, the membership of that has actually got a pretty good idea now of the state of our water quality, and I think there is quite a lot of room for improvement there. So, and that's just one aspect of it. So I suppose in terms of having a direction of travel, which basically encompasses everything, some parts of our environment will be in a better state than others, but is it fair to say that fairly soon down this process that the state of all our environmental attributes will be understood?
That's the intention. So we are committing to coming back to you with a state of the environment report, acknowledging that, and through the Kapiti Whaitoa, you'll be aware that Greater Wellington does some reporting, but what's been discovered through the Whaitoa process is actually at a local level there's some other things that would be of interest. So we do want to leverage off good work that has been undertaken, and so I think Te Atiawa had tabled a report that they have been working on looking at more local measures of understanding the state of the environment, and so we would be looking to see what is it that we could report in addition to what already may be available to help us understand how our environment's going. And it may not be exactly what's reported at a regional level, for example, now. So we want to come back to you and just work through that so we really understand what do we understand about the environment at a local level, and to make sure that you think we're focused on the right things, and also our community agrees that we're focused on the right things. And then that does include ensuring that we've got a really strong link in with our mana whenua partners, because they have a lot of good information, insights and evidence that they can add to this picture. And at the moment, we do not have all of that available, or we're not using it, and we have an aspiration to bring that in, essentially.
Thank you for that. So have you got a time frame for when that state of the environment would come to us?
Part of our next steps will be looking to scope it with you. So we're going to scope for it because there'll be some information that we can readily access and have available. There may be gaps that information doesn't exist. So we will just want to understand what it would take to fill some of those gaps. So it won't be here, we've just done a report. We're going to talk to you about what it can be, what it would include, and then bring that back in some phases and stages. And if there's information we don't have that we think is useful, we would be coming back to talk to you about what it would take to get that information. And again, put it in the wider suite of, I'm not going to call it a wish list flippantly, but essentially there may be a variety of information that we think we need that we don't have. So, and that wouldn't just be across the environment, it would be across other areas as well. So we'd be bringing that as a suite back to you to say, this is what it would take. How does that fit in with our timelines and priorities? Because to do it all at once could be costly, and we want to think about how can we do this in a phased and sort of more iterative way, so that we can balance the implications for the bottom line, essentially. So it's the right pace to better understand what we're sitting on, because there is some information that helps us understand. It's just not complete, is maybe how I'd land there.
So thank you for that. So, so obviously it sounds like this piece of work is going to take some time. The other piece of time frame that I'm interested in, so obviously this was going to go to public consultation at the end of March, and we'll have a conversation about that. But what is the time frame, you know, what is a decent time frame to consider when this document will be signed off? Well, basically the direction of travel and then the strategy, and then and later on a separate document will be the implementation plan. So it's quite a long piece of work.
It is a long piece of work, and I'll respond in three ways. Firstly, the direction of travel, its intention is to pull out what I think are the critical things that we'd chat to the community about, so that they get a chance to say, yep, we think this is important or not, and taking on the points that Councillor Coe had made about being really punchy up front about what this is and what this isn't, in terms of our role and what we're focused on. The intention is that we have pushed out our direction of travel for our 4 new operating strategies in advance of June. So we have an aspiration to land all of our strategies between July and what will now be August, September, because we're pushing out some timelines to align with things like Te Kutai Kapiti and the Whaitua. And so I'll just unpack this a little bit. Our long-term plan, we're going out to consult with the community between March and April. We've agreed that we are pulling back on consultation in other areas so that people can have a really good go at just focusing on our long-term plan to have their say. Te Kutai Kapiti is going to be coming in towards the end of April potentially, to talk about the preferred pathways and recommendations that that the CAP is starting to consider. Now, I'm going to be talking to you about Te Kutai Kapiti and engagement for the full spectrum in a different conversation, but I'm just mentioning that because we think it's really important to line up some of these conversations. So it would seem a little weird to be talking about climate change before we've landed our Te Kutai Kapiti conversation, given that we've been talking to the community about that for some time. So we're just looking at the timeframes for those engagements and going, Te Kutai Kapiti, because it's almost closed, we get into the report phase. Really, the outputs of that, once you've made your decision, sort of flow into our climate change strategy as our adaptation area. It is the same for the environment strategy with the Kapiti Whaitua, is we want to look at when some of the consultation phases are happening with that to make sure that we can incorporate the decisions that you might be making around water into this strategy. Otherwise, we're going to have a document and then you're going to make some decisions, which would be a little weird. And some of them are to do with priority, and some of them are to do with focus. So we, in the background, quite rightly saying we need to line this up. So these strategies will push closer to the September point. So that's the climate change resilience and the environment strategy, but they will be completed this year still in line with our intentions. The economic development strategy and our health strategy are able to push forward more quickly because they don't have the same constraints in terms of other processes that are underway. So really this year we're wanting to make sure that we keep good communications with the community and we're not being confusing in the way that we're coming out to maybe talk about some of these topics. So we'll be coming back to you more fully. I think it's the 7th of March now. We've got our strategic direction session, and so we're going to talk to you about that wider communications plan and how it sits alongside Vision Kapiti as well, so that you've got a full communications and engagement program to look at, and we can see how those things line up. So we've been doing a little bit of work in the background to make sure that's complete. So I guess to your question, Jocelyn, we're aiming to get these 2 strategies over the line between July and September, depending on how it lines up with that communication and engagement program.
So thank you very much for that explanation. I think it's really important to not look at these strategies in isolation, but how they fit into the bigger picture and have all the information that is going along in these other processes so that can feed into these as well. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I suppose in terms of this document, we've been asked about any gaps, and I agree with everything that's in here. But one thing that I am sort of feeling that isn't maybe highlighted well enough is to do with our, I suppose, our growth. So in the document it talks about sustainable built environments, our population growth, impervious surfaces and runoff. And so I'm just, to me, I would like to see something in there that I suppose, so we've talked about how, by adding more into it can actually add more cost. And I suppose what I'm looking at here is maybe having a process that guides developers to with requirements in terms of improving the, I suppose, the percentage of trees in the developments that they have, as well as the grassed areas. I suppose the prime example is the development over there. It seems to be a lot of concrete. And I know that there's probably only a very, very small requirement to have impervious areas. But I think, and they've done that because they're able to do it. And to me, I don't know whether, having a strategy is strong enough, or whether it's something that then leads into our district plan saying that these developments and other developments can also enhance our environment. So that's one part of it. The other part is actually, and I think Andy talked about it, was actually about connecting our natural environment. So we have lots and lots of reserves and parks, but often they are quite discrete. They don't join up, and I suppose there are opportunities when there are these developments to actually encourage the developer to build these corridors. So there's two parts to that. One is as green and blue corridors for our Indigenous species, but also for us as humans connecting through them through our CWB and through our CWB. So, yeah, two thoughts. I'd be really interested to hear your comments on both of those, please, and whether you think that both of those are covered in this and whether or not there is actually a gap or two. Thank you.
I'm just going to say, and I will pass on to Simon, that I think the points that you raised, we have a little black box on, I'm not sure what page that is. What page is that? That one? No? Sorry, on page 23, there's a little black box that says priority activities. Study of the environment benchmarking, mapping out existing actors and activities, alignment with target areas and identifying gaps and opportunities. I think the mapping out existing actors and activities ultimately would have that in there, but I do think we could emphasise in here some work that we are going to be progressing this year with you. For the moment, I'll call it a terrible term, master planning, which means something different to everybody, but essentially the idea that we're actually going to work with you and the community to go, let's have a look at the settings that we have that's guiding growth and development. Some of that is through the district plan. So are those settings collaborated in the way that we want them to be? Is there enough emphasis on open spaces and some of the green belt that I've heard you all talking about? Are industrial zones in the right place? All that sort of really good and targeted conversation that needs to be had to understand whether over time have we made changes to our settings that have enabled or constrained what we want to do in the right way. So we're going to be looking at that with you with an expectation that we'll be able to identify where there are some things that we need to adjust or recalibrate the priority for those things. Because at the moment, we already have a list of district plan changes that we're going to be talking to you about that have previously been put on the table as things that we need to focus on. It might be that there's other ones you also want considered and the priority for which they need to progress that we'd like to talk about. So we can note that as an important thing that is underway but will be part of those priority actions, because I think if we don't get that right from the outset in terms of land use, we could be talking about some of the things that are niggly, they feel like they're really important, but nothing's been done because we haven't had that conversation. So that's the intention. So I think we could add that as a dot point here. but note that it would be picked up in our activities. And I just will hand over to Simon because I know he's got something to add.
Thanks. Yeah, I just wanted to add, I think that's a good example of a good alignment, with the CWB network, into connecting both people's sense of connection to the place, lessening their environmental impact in terms of, getting around, and aligning that with revegetation and possibly blue-green infrastructure in terms of stormwater management. So that's a good, it's an area of potential alignment. As Chris was saying, master plans are one way of sort of mapping out all those various issues as it relates to a particular place that can help to join up those issues. So, but yeah, the strategies will ultimately look at the broad, those broad outcomes we're seeking to achieve, and how to progress each of those through the work program. Yeah.
So thank you. Sorry, Gina.
I was just going to add, if you look at page 19 as well, that talks about the known environmental challenges and levers for change, and some of the things that you're talking about are included in there. So, in noting the driving forces of growth and noting in the target areas things like ecological corridors. So, yes, absolutely, we will cover those and take your point that we can look to emphasise those in the documents we're putting out.
And perhaps make some examples.
Yeah, and include some examples as well.
So thank you for that. So I suppose the other part of that too is how developments in our area, housing developments in our area, can be much greener or much more sensitive to our environments.
Yeah. So as you said, that's again one of those focus areas for the direction of travel. So looking at sustainable built environments and blue-green infrastructure, how to integrate those. So absolutely, it'll be addressed as part of that.
Thank you very much. So, sorry. So that we have a few more questions now, Mr. Judge.
So thank you, Madam Chair. My question is one of like the scope and the powers in law that a council of this type has, and it's not. I'm not trying to preempt action on the ground or not on the ground. So I'm just thinking about two things. One is council's ability to stop building in places that you shouldn't build in, because I'm aware that councils of this type have limited ability to stop developers from developing in, say, on floodplains or whatever. So if you can summarise very briefly your knowledge of the limits of council's powers to stop building in high hazard areas at the moment in law. And then the second thing is, again, thinking about Auckland City, which is a different type of council to us. They have a Making Space for Water program, which is linking up all of the flood paths, and they're overgrounding their stream networks, etc. And this is an extreme example, and I hope it doesn't happen here. And again, the question's more about the legal ability to do this sort of thing, is that a number of residential dwellings are actually being bought up and sort of compulsory purchase to make flood paths. So is there sort of things in law that we can avoid stuff being built in an area that might end up being in a flood path, etc., or part of a natural defence system against flooding, etc. So, but my questions really are about the scope of legal powers that councils of this type had. I'm not trying to preempt decisions on the ground that may or may not be made or have to be made.
We are legislatively required in our district plan to have considered what I'll call natural hazards and put some parameters around that. So we do have a flood risk hazard chapter in our plan. We are attempting to bring in a coastal risk hazard chapter in our plan. And PC2 actually brought in an interim, I'll say, coverage for coastal hazard risk. It just is part of meeting those requirements. So there are qualifying matters in our plan, and those are two examples of that. I think the challenge might be that there's existing builds that have occurred over time that might be in those hazard zones, and so part of the work that we focus on sometimes is about how do we ensure resilience where something's already built. I would say that the standards that we have in our plan look at building requirements. In fact, there is legislation around building requirements to ensure that where things are built, it's appropriate for the conditions of the land that you're building on. And Laura's going to talk more about, from a regulatory perspective, the actions that we take through our process to make sure those things are met. But I think, unfortunately, the more information we get, the better armed we are to ensure that our settings are calibrated in the right way. And I think Te Katai Kapiti is a really good example of we have been building an evidence base for some time to try and better understand the coastal risk hazard. In the same sense with flood risk, we're continually looking at how we can better understand the risk and from inundation from water, and what that means for how we shift where we are, but also manage for what we have. So I'll hand to Laura because she can talk about the second side of that.
So first of all, I can just say Laura is standing in for Sir Jefferson, who's unable to be here today.
Thank you. And I know you've asked about the legal tools that are available, and I'm not a lawyer by any means. I'm a planner though. And from the regulatory space, we can work with the policy settings that we're given, which derive from these strategies and filter down through the district plan. In terms of the RMA, you can legally create a prohibitive activity, which means that you technically cannot apply for a resource consent at all. It's just not an option. So it basically denies any applications on certain activities. Yep. So that is one tool. It's quite a heavy tool. We have a couple of activities in our district plan. I think it's around spray painting cars in residential areas, that sort of thing, but it is a legal tool that's available.
Okay, so you could stop someone from building in a high hazard area legally?
If the district plan settings and the evidence was there to show that it could be made a prohibited activity.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Laura, for that. So now we'll move on to Councillor Warwick and Christian for that as well. Thank you.
Mine's just backing up what Jocelyn said about the CWB and keeping the advisory group really on track with this, giving them, coming and talking to them and making sure they're feeding into the process when you go out for consultation, because that is a very huge environmental benefit, our network, and the way it can grow and connect people without cars and stuff like that. So
we'll make sure we add that into the communications approach that we bring back to you.
So thank you. Now we have Mr. Black online. Thank you, Simon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Hey, just another further question regarding we're supposed to be in a climate emergency at the moment. How does that impact our strategy, and what does that actually mean for it?
So the climate change and resilience strategy is focused on our response to the climate emergency that our council has declared. The environment strategy is trying to acknowledge effectively the wider span of things in our context related to the environment that are important but not related to climate change. They might be impacted or they might entwine, but for example, the health of our water exists irrelevant to climate change. Another example might be the use of land in our district. We would still be focused on that, irrelevant to climate change. And that's not to say that there aren't some things that will relate to climate change, and one of them I just mentioned being coastal hazard risk. You know, we're entering a conversation about the impact of climate change on that. So there'll be some topics that cross into both, but we wanted to acknowledge that there's environmental factors and things that we want to focus on outside of climate change itself. So that's how they're meant to sit together. So over time, what will happen with our operating strategies is using our needs-based outcomes framework, which, you know, that's the donut model that we've talked to you about before, which has things like our environment and climate change, and water and air. So for place, people and partnership, we'll be looking at how our strategies come together to collectively focus our energy on the things that matter to our community. So there is some link. There will be independencies, but they've got different purposes, and that's what we're trying to do at any rate.
Great. Thank you very much, Chris. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Simon. So we'll now move on to Councillor Halliday.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We're very brief. On page 23, you're talking about the what might we do to improve the environment around circular economies. Talks about investing in the waste minimalisation efforts, but I also wanted to highlight the education aspect of that as well as being quite an important aspect of that. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll add that in.
Thank you, Councillor Halliday. So that is the end of the questions. Actually, no, our Mayor would like to speak. Thank you, Janet.
Yes, sorry to jump in last minute, and apologies I can't be there for the whole meeting today, but it's been really good to pop in and hear this really great discussion around this paper. I just wonder if there's enough focus on the pressures from central government and the challenges of working in collaboration with Greater Wellington and other agencies. I know it's in there, but like on that bottom line, I think it's page 17 where it talks about or 19, where it talks about the challenges in that bottom line. I think that's really important. I just went to a talk by Chris Bishop this morning, actually, where he's talking about more focus on greenfield developments into the future, which will certainly have some environmental impacts for us. Also really happy to see food production in there as a challenge, because that's something that's being talked about quite a lot at a regional level. But thanks for the work that's gone into this, absolutely fantastic. Thanks.
Thank you, Janet. So that's the end of the questions. So the next thing is to look at our recommendations. And I'm just wondering at this point whether Chris or Gina would like to make some comments about B in terms of the date when this goes out to public consultation. That sounds like you'd like them to change this.
Yeah, I wonder, Chris, feel free to jump in. I wonder whether we have a separate recommendation that says note that we will come back to the committee with some more advice on the timeframes.
So thank you. So if we could have some words on the screen to that effect. The other thought I had was there have been a few ideas that have come out of our discussion, and they haven't really been, they're not actually captured as a recommendation. It's about providing feedback, and I'm thinking maybe we also need a recommendation in there that actually notes the feedback provided today as well. I think that would probably capture it. So I'm just saying that, one of the points that we were asked to do today was to provide feedback and to fill in any gaps. The way this is worded, it's not actually a recommendation as a result of the discussion. So it's maybe just changing the word slightly to say note the I suppose the
Can we not just say that that the Climate Environment Subcommittee has provided feedback, and this will be incorporated into the next.
Perfect.
Yeah,
draft.
that'll work. Yes. Yep.
And I would presume that elected members are able to submit further comments directly in between now and the next meeting, because we really need to nail it, don't we, on the 14th, if we can.
I think on the 14th, given the comments I've made to you around the timing of engagement, we will be providing an update to the Strategy, Operations and Finance Committee on, I'm going to say, pushing out the engagement. So I think there'll be another update to both this committee and Strategy, Ops and Finance later on. So we're not going to ask the Strategy, Ops and Finance Committee to approve for consultation because we want to bring it in line with the other two processes I mentioned, one being the Kapiti Whai Tour for this strategy and Takatai Kapiti for the climate. So I'd like to make that update formally so that we can document it and then come back to you. So what I'm essentially saying is this committee is going to have another look-see at the documents of travel before they go up to the Strategy Ops Committee.
So do we need to put something in there about it going to SOF in that case?
So we actually had a request just to adjourn for 5 minutes to sort out the wording.
Right.
So we'll do that and then we'll clarify the wording, come back.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. No, we're not. So if we change it to what we're thinking, because I think